Morning, everyone. Welcome to our Civil Defence and Emergency Management Group meeting. Everyone take a deep breath and then we start. We have quite a bit of work to work through today, so I'll first take apologies. No apologies received?
One. Andrew Hickey.
Andrew Hickey is, yes, Mr. Hickey is too busy. Yep, he's at White Island, so I got Mr. Hickey here. No one else? Okay. So, no declarations of interest. Oh, yeah, okay. No declarations of interest. Let's move on to our minutes on page 5. If everyone just glance over to page 5 and take a look at our last meeting, which we had at Te Poho Rawiri. Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Subject to just clarifying what the 10.1, the third bullet point, can someone please explain what that means? Because without any substance around it, Te Pū is a long way from Te Aroa. So what exactly, this is page 6 of the agenda, what exactly is the third bullet point meant to be telling us?
Mr. Tamati, would you like to respond to that?
I can contact people within those communities.
Morning, everyone. Yeah, I wasn't at that meeting. Yeah, and I've read that this morning and I was a little bit confused. But if I could possibly clarify with the community links, Te Aroa, with Mr. Hovell up there. He's our coordinator and he runs Te Aroa, Hicks Bay to Pōtaka. And we have James Palmer, Ruatoria, runs all the way to Tiki down to Tokomaru. That makes it even clearer.
Through your worship, I think it's a mistake in the minutes, which is why it does not make sense that there are independent communities there are located in Te Aroa.
Then with the removal of bullet point 3, because I think we actually know what happens with community links. If bullet point 3 is removed from 10.1, I'll move the minutes be.
Can bullet point 3 be removed? Because it's not. Thank you. I just see here, yes, thank you, Josh. I just see on the 4th of December, Shannon sent me an email. Apologies for the 18th. I'm unavailable for that day. So I will move that apology for Councillor Dowsing, second. All in favour? Contrary, carried. Thank you for that. Who moved the minutes? Councillor Seymour, moved by seconded Councillor Cranston. All in favour? Contrary, carried. Thank you. We move on to our action sheet, which is on page 7. Pat, can you just turn your microphone down? Thank you. Any comments or questions around our action sheet? Nothing there. Then we move on to our governance plan, which we can see we're right at the end on the 18th of December. We've got our work for today. We've got no leave of absence, acknowledgements or tributes, public inputs and petitions. We do have no extraordinary business, notices of motion or adjourned business. So I take everyone to page 11 to our first report, which is our CDEM group plan minor amendments decision processes. Mr. Tamati, all these reports I take as read, but I do give you the opportunity just to give us a little bit of oversight, and then councillors can ask questions for clarification. Thank you.
Through the chair, I'll take it. The report in front of you is an output of the CDEM review, just seeking So one of the issues we identified through the review was the lack of clarity around decision-making processes and who makes what. So that's what this paper is seeking to remedy actually, and then preparing some comms so that it's quite clear who's responsible where and when in our public facing. Probably timely when you see the events last week, who's running what. This is quite critical.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions in regards to this report? Councillor Seymour.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to move the report, but the report raises issues that council should be alert to, I think. And on page 12, under health and safety, it reminds me that we don't have an in-depth health and safety report to this council of organisational matters. So, it says clarity about who's responsible for health and safety. Well, that just reminds me that we probably should initiate health and safety report to council. We sometimes get it in the chief executive's report, but it's quite, not, in a relatively small way. So I ask you to look at that. And then on page 13, the leverage across council, the first bullet point in that section, which is under longer term actions, undertake work to gain an understanding of which council positions are vital. And I know I've expressed my concern about this previously, but one of the issues for this district, is it 13?
What page are you on, Pat? No, that's not 13.
18, sorry.
18. Thank
The
you.
bottom is cut off. It's still in, it's the next page over, so it's attachment 19.337.1. I'm just concerned about roading and whoever fills that position in this organisation having a substantial position, when I think this is what this first bullet point is saying, because when we have an event here, it is generally our roads that are absolutely critical.
18.
18. It is 18 and it's under the headed leveraging across council, and it's telling this organisation to understand which council positions are vital and therefore not available for the deployment in a CDEM event. And we have half-pie discussed it previously, and I do have real concerns about whoever holds the roading positions in this organisation having a substantial responsibility in a CDEM event because of their obligation to see that roads function and the work that happens on roads. So I just make my point again, and I'm happy to leave it with you.
Happy to comment on that through your worship. So the references to the director that has a portfolio responsibility for roads, he doesn't directly manage the roads. That sits at tier 3. So that director does not on a day-to-day basis manage the reinstatement of the roads. That is what his staff does, and that is what contractors do. So there's a wider portfolio responsibility. So that is well catered for.
Supplementary to that, though, there will be a huge reference back to that director because of expenditure and things. So I just think we need to, I mean, I'll leave it with you because management will be alert to it. I just think we need to be concerned about where we spread our resources and how thinly we spread them. And I'm happy to move
So the paper has been moved by Councillor Seymour and seconded by Councillor Burdett. Any other questions for clarification, or if not, I'm going to put it to the floor. All in favour? Contrary? Carried. Thank you. And now we move to page 19, where we look at our internal CDEM review recommendations, next steps. So in the past, we've received the 40 recommendations, and I see staff are starting to implement those. So, Mr. Tamati, anything you would like to add to this report? Or Ms. Kohere?
Through the chair, just again, a lot of these reports are outputs of the review that was completed. You're aware we've completed some short-term steps that were critical that we got underway straight away. These were identified as some medium-term actions that we needed to complete and get underway to support our CDEM function. So we're really looking to endorse moving into some of those previously identified medium-term actions.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson. So it's moved by Councillor Burdett. Councillor Robinson, question.
Thank you. Paragraph 9 on page 22 talks about the Whairawhiti Group Controller and some of his alternates having resigned from the position and need to urgently replace and train. Could you please have a clarification around that, and particularly timeframes and the suitability of training? Thank you.
Julie?
So through the chair, John Clark has indicated his wish to resign as our group controller. That has led us to identify how do we build that capacity and probably not have just one controller. So we're trying to build the capacity in the organisation. The challenge that we have at the moment is there's not a lot of clear guidance around controller training from McDem. So I think that's what that paragraph refers to.
Supplementary question. So you indicated then that there's a wish to maybe have more than one controller. Do we actually have a template or guide for that, or is that a wish that we wish to develop? And then if it is a wish we wish to develop, what is the plan for developing that in timeframes? Because we don't want to be left without a controller. And when does Mr. Clark want to step out of role, please?
Councillor, our training plan this year and for next year, for 2020, has identified our gaps in our controller training. Now, to address those gaps, we're taking a two-tier approach. Tier one will be the NEMA, or used to be McDem approach. It's tier one, and they will provide response and recovery leadership coursing for people that we identified that will be controllers, will be response managers, and will be recovery managers. We've started that already. The tier two approach was at a local level, is something that we've initiated, where we will give training to our controllers as per the CDM group, identified in the CDM group plan, once every 6 weeks. And that's an afternoon session with me, and we go through problem solving and things like that. Supplementary to that, we have run 5 exercises this year where we place an individual controller in control of a team in an ECC, and we put them through their paces in a safe learning environment to figure out their own leadership styles within that ECC. So next year in 2020, I'm hoping to get another 4 identified controllers to do the first layer of stuff with NEMA. And throughout the whole year, everyone will be involved in my own organic local training. Does that answer your question?
Not totally. So as I understood, Mr. Clark says he's going to resign. When is that to happen? And as I understood, you want to replace him with several controllers. When is that to happen?
Yeah, Mr. Clark has indicated, strong indication he wants to step down. we will be in a better position come March to indicate a replacement for Mr. Clark. Reason I say that is because we have possibly two controllers that will be attending the Response and Recovery Leadership course, the inverted comma controllers course run by NEMA in February, March. Should those two controllers pass that course, then we'll probably push to have one of them maybe replace Mr. Clark. But that's a discussion that I'll need to have with the CEO.
So if I may just add to that, so John Clark has said that he would support us until there is appropriate transition in place, which we're really thankful and grateful for. We have approved, the CDM group previously approved a list of alternate controllers, which we're training up, which are the ones that Mirimu is referring to, and we can circulate the names. They're all council staff.
Councillor Cranston.
Yeah, thanks. The list of recommendation is quite large. Have you had a good look at that and decided that you're comfortable with the ability to resource all recommendations? The 40 recommendations that have been put through to us. There's quite an extensive list there.
Yes, through your worship, we have no, well, we do have an option not to, but it would not be good practice. So the medium-term recommendations are ones that we will chip away at and report back on as we can, resources permitting. So the first ones that we did in terms of the short-term immediate, they were the urgent ones that needed to be addressed. We can now move on to the other ones with some pace, but recognising them it might take a little bit longer to deliver.
Well, if we've got no more questions, I take you to page 20, where we've got 2 recommendations. Just note the report and then direct our Chief Executive to initiate work to deliver on the medium-term recommendations from the internal review. All in favour? Contrary? Carried. And it was moved by Councillor Bill Bedett and seconded by myself. We move on to page 28, where we will talk about our CDM recovery framework.
So through the chair, we've recently consulted on this matter. The summary of submissions is attached, and I'm sure you've read them all, with some key players making some really constructive inputs in there. This report really is seeking your approval to amend the group plan so that our recovery framework is appropriate and fit for purpose, and now has been informed by those submitters.
Any questions, councillors? Councillor Robinson.
Paragraph 23 on page 37, third bullet point, it says, in preparing and reviewing the group plan, the CDM group must follow the process in the Act. And the third bullet point says, ensure submitters have the opportunity to be heard by the CDM group. So we had a 1-month public notification period. Have we afforded them the opportunity to be heard by the CDM group in compliance with the Act?
Excuse me, councillor, can you direct me which bullet point again? Sorry. Oh,
So through the chair and Yvette Kinsella, who was managing the processes down the back, and she may respond if she chooses to. But when we go out for submissions, we ask the submitters if they would like an opportunity to be heard, and if they haven't asked for that opportunity, then we don't need to run that hearings process.
Thank you, Your Worship. It was really just to support the work that has been done. I think it's been well notified, and it is a live plan. It will continue to evolve. That's all I want to say, and I would like to move that it be accepted as such.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I didn't take a note. Who moved it? Oh, there we go. Okay, councillors, any other discussion? If not, we've got a Councillor Cranston.
Just out of interest, really, there's a lot of work done in the recovery and the resilience side of it, but the readiness side of it, how far in advance of an emergency can we work? Like nowadays with modern weather forecasting, and probably one day we'll even be able to predict earthquakes, I don't know. So what is the CDM function in front of an event? Is there space that's worked on there?
Well, apparently there is an element in Gisborne that can predict earthquakes. We had a resident email me to say that their dog gets a bit itchy and scratchy when an earthquake comes. Can predict the weather as well, apparently. Yeah. But in regards to the readiness is probably the only element of the 4 Rs where we could probably do within the resources that I have, probably do a lot of good there and a lot of influence. When we talk about readiness, in my mind, it's training. Training is the big element. Probably 80% of readiness is training. The other 20% will be the resilience and that sort of stuff out in the community. But the 80% that I can influence will be focused around the training plan that I have in place. Again, 2 layers. The first layer is or the council members of the GDC that wish to partake in the readiness stuff, running our ECC exercises, putting people and volunteers on courses. And the second layer, by no means less important, is our community link volunteers, putting them through courses as well, and anyone else in the community that wants to do readiness or resilience type courses. So that's how we front fund it.
But that's long-term readiness, but I just wonder if there's some sort of short-term readiness that would occur to a civil defence stuff. If we had Ebola coming now, I think we would be far better able to predict that sort of event now than we were in 1988. So if we knew something was going to happen next Wednesday, what would we be doing today, rather than that long-term stuff?
Does that, sorry, through your worship, just to clarify, is that in terms of the different types of events? Because we have tsunami plans, flood plans, so our hazard plans, resilience plans that kind of cover those for the now?
If something was imminent, would we be enacting some sort of civil defence program to mobilise, if you like, 3 days before an event rather than 3 days after? I don't know, just a thought.
Through the chair, if I can take you to, there was an earlier report that had the road diagram, which kind of indicates the steps around it. Even though it was around decision making, we need to understand whether we're in an event or not, and those kinds of things. So that distinction, once we know we're in an event, we're pretty well with what we have ready to go. But it's with things like weather, obviously we can anticipate, but then sometimes preparing people rather than actually educating them so that they are ready to move and not waiting for like a Facebook post, then that's another challenge that we definitely need to work on.
Councillor Seymour and then Councillor Wharehinga.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say we do have substantial weather warnings, and both by text and by email, which are really advanced in the last 2 or 3 years. So coming out of our civil defence team. And then there's the River Watch that you can watch on the internet. So obviously there's a zillion types of events, regrettably, that council needs to have some kind of plan in place for, and not all of them have a simple solution, but certainly as far as floods, which present this district probably the most significant civil defence efforts that we've had to address in the past, we have advanced that information to our community quite substantially.
Thank you for that. Councillor Wharehinga.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm really interested in regards to something that Mr. Tamati said around readiness and resilience courses for our community volunteers. I think that would be a really good point for us to push forward into the community, or a good subject for us to push into the community in regards to, say, maybe a future comm strategy, because we have we have some vocal people in regards to how ready we are in our CDM work. So it'll be nice to be able to offer to those vocal people and to those volunteers and to those enthusiastic people in our community who are civil defence, emergency management minded, to possibly get them engaged inside of that space, but then also kind of working wider with marae, hapu, whānau, and things like that. Are those already on the plans, Mr. Tamati?
Now, I don't know which individuals you're talking about per se, but as a group, we are inclusive, and if anyone knocks on our door and offers their services, knowledge and advice to matters of emergency management, well, I'm all ears. When it comes to coursing and training, absolutely. An example of that was we were at Te Karaka 2 Mondays ago, and I have offered up training courses to our community link volunteers out there. Of course, they need to balance their commitments, work-life balance and things like that, and family, but we will always offer things for them to do.
I just wanted to share with you, we've had 2 opportunities now. First was at the mayoral training, and last week at the regional sector training, where Sarah Stewart-Black, who's coordinated White Island, who's in charge of NEMA, came and spoke to mayors and regional chairs. And she spoke about, it's wonderful, and and by law we need to have certain things in place, but us as elected members, our most important message to our constituents would be to be ready yourself, be ready with your whānau, talk about what's going on in your area and be ready when stuff happen. And for us to constantly communicate that people are not put out when we talk about it, that is just what we talk about in our community. We live in a country where we do have lots of natural hazards, and us in Tairāwhiti live in an area next to the coast where there's a lot of earthquake movement. So I do want us as the leaders also to make sure we each go into our community and normalize chatting about what you would do in certain situations. Because people will look at us when something happens, and we need to be comfortable that our CEO have her team doing the work behind the scenes while we will be able to carry those messages to our communities. So I just wanted to share that with you. Anyone else wants to you just hit Mr. Sheldrake?
Thank you.
Councillor Sheldrake.
I might have brought this up before, but I'm just interested in the relationship with the port. There's a lot of matchsticks sitting over there, and I'd hate to see something big like that. What sort of discussion going on there?
Complete with our tsunami inundation report is a subsequent report that looks at the movement of the logs in that tsunami scenario. Now, I can't speak of the specifics of or the recommendations of it, but we do have a pioneer report in there that sort of indicates where the movement of the logs will go to. Dr. Murray Caves, he could potentially talk to it, but no? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we'll do that in our latest
Work
agenda.
has been done around it though, yeah.
So anyone else want to add? If not, I'll give Councillor Robinson and Cranston. Okay, first Councillor Burdett, and then Robinson, and then Cranston.
After
And
your
then we're going to vote.
comments, Your Worship, I just thought we need to remember our rural communities are very, very resilient, and they have their own networks. So let's not forget that.
We definitely shouldn't forget that. Councillor Robinson, and then Cranston, and then I'm going to put it to the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Tamati, just please clarify for me, what's our formal relationship with iwi and engaging in this space, please? Because I just can't recall.
They're formally invited to our KEG meetings every quarter underneath the chair. Oh, sorry, the coordinating executive group. So the KEG,
Not the
the
key.
KEG is the operation. Basically, the KEG is all, if you consider it the operational arm of CDM Group. It's where all the advisors are, the technical experts, the police chiefs, the fire chiefs, DHB, iwi, and all iwi arms are encouraged to turn up. They're formally invited. Yeah. Some do.
Councillor Cranston.
Page 45 discusses the adequate insurance level. Where are we at with that? It discusses raising it.
Through your worship, we've got a piece of work that we are progressing around reviewing all of council's insurance, and this will be wrapped up in part of that work.
Okay, I'm going to put our recommendation on page 29, where we note the contents and report, and particularly number A to 1A, the summary of submissions, and then 2, the proposed changes. I've got a mover and Councillor Faulkner, seconder and Councillor Wharehinga, all in favour, contrary carried. I just want to go back to our apologies. I have texted Councillor Akuata Brown, and she is putting in an apology for lateness. So I just want to add that to our apologies. Are the movers and seconders of our apologies happy for that? Who were the movers and seconders of our apologies, Coral? Thank you. Just want to add that in there. Are you happy, Josh? I'm happy too, thank you. Okay, people, we move on to page 132. We are now talking about flooding, natural hazards information series. And I assume there's a presentation for us. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Kia ora. I think I know some of you, but my name's Paul Murphy. I'm the Environmental Science Team Leader at Gisborne District Council. I've been at Council for about 14 years, working around resource consents, and I'm also on the flood warning team. I've got a presentation around flooding today as part of the Natural Hazards series. Switch that. Yeah, I've got a presentation. It should be around 20 minutes long, and I'm happy to take questions throughout if that assists.
Okay, it's in our agenda, so please feel free to take a look while Paul starts.
Okay.
Go forward with
Okay.
your printouts.
Cool. Yeah, so the outline for the presentation is what natural hazards, local natural hazards are applicable here in Gisborne, some examples. What is flooding? Some notable local historic floods, definition of flood frequency, our rainfall sites and alarms, and flood forecasting and hazard planning, and where to next. So if you just turn to page 3, I've got some examples of local hazards.
Page 136 just shows us some of our natural stuff happening here.
Point out that the road at the bottom of page 136, 135 is my great-grandfather's, great-grandparents' property. And
The black and white picture.
tsunami, they got that from 27 in their house, and the house was turned around in the tsunami.
Wow.
That's one of my great-grandfather's greatest properties.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so just saying at the top, I've just got a photo of the Turanganui River flooding back in 2015, was a pretty significant event. The Wainui Beach erosion this year, the tsunami at Tarapuri, like Councillor Robinson said, and also the 2007 earthquake. So yeah, the region is prone to lots of different types of natural hazards. So floods that are typically triggered by heavy or prolonged rainfall, but they could also be triggered by other factors such as high sea level near river mouths during events. Floods are the most frequent and costliest natural disasters in New Zealand. Between 1968 and 2017, the country experienced over 80 damaging floods. And if you just turn to the next page, which shows an outline of the Gisborne region.
138.
Yeah, so flooding is a major hazard in the Gisborne region. Flood control works give some protection in some areas, but the floodplains are still vulnerable. There are numerous other localities where flooding can be a hazard, but I've highlighted 3 areas in the region. So Poverty Bay Flats is a major area for potential flooding. The flood control scheme provides some good protection, and there's a project to upgrade the flood control scheme to provide added protection. But the townships surrounding the flats are particularly vulnerable, starting at Te Karaka, which is particularly vulnerable during flood events, and also Ormond, Minatoki and Muriwai. And moving up the coast to Tolaga Bay, the Oawa area, everyone's probably aware of the event that happened last year in Oawa. So both the Manga, Hea and the Hikuai rivers are particularly vulnerable for flooding, and Mangatuna is a particularly vulnerable township in the Oawa catchment, and quite often when we get rain events through, it's probably the most vulnerable area in the region. Moving up the coast further to Ruatoria, the Waimatatini Flats adjacent to the Waipu River are also particularly vulnerable. It's a large river and the flats are quite, I guess, low-lying, and there's no property as such, like in terms of buildings, but a lot of stock are vulnerable in that location. So the event last year in 2018, I wouldn't say it flooded. I'm not sure whether Councillor Burdett has a comment, but it got really close to one of the water supplies, the Racecourse Spring. So I went down there, and the silt was right near one of the key water supplies in the area. So it got pretty close to causing some effects. I'm not sure whether you have any comments.
Good. Thank you.
So just moving on to some local notable floods. Kopowhapara is on the, I guess, the area close to the Hawke's Bay region. It's between the Gisborne and Hawke's Bay region, the catchment. There was a flood in 1938, and there were workers working on the Gisborne to Napier railway line, and they were camping. Not sure if you can see in your photos on the left, that's the camp.
Are those little tents?
Those are tents, yeah, so those are the workers working in the tents for the railway line, and there was a massive rain event that struck in the upper catchment, and a 5-metre wall of water came down the catchment and took out the campsite, and unfortunately 21 people were killed, and it's the largest number of fatalities for a 20th century flood in New Zealand. So the right-hand photo is the aftermath of that event.
Was your grandfather killed there? Oh, that's sad.
The next notable flood is the 1948 flood on the Poverty Bay Flats. It's said to be the heaviest since Poverty Bay settlement began. It was the largest peak flow and probably the largest area of land inundated at one time. So about 85 square kilometres was inundated. The bank of the Waipo River from Te Karaka down to the river mouth overflowed and right through that area. It was prior to the stock banks being in place. And there was a mass burial site. There were 16,000 stock that were lost in that event. And there was a mass burial site down in the sand dunes at Ahapuni. The cost of the flood was estimated at being $21 million in 2008. So it's a massive event. And it actually led to the, investigation and design of the Waipo flood control scheme following that event. And also a young man was drowned at Whakatutu in that event, so there was one life lost. There was also serious damage to the Rangatira suspension bridge. I'm not sure if you're aware of that at Te Karaka. It was actually came off its abutments, so it was just hanging on its cables. The next notable flood is the 1977 flood in Gisborne, so that was really affecting the town. Gisborne received 156 millimetres of rain in 24 hours and a total of 217 mils over the 2 days. Civil defence emergency was declared on the 21st through to the 22nd, and about 1,000 people passed through the evacuation centre. All schools are closed, and there was flooding occurring on Crawford Road, and the Kopu Whakapata stream on Crawford Road became a torrent and spread around a dozen houses up to their window height. The Wainui Road also became a river, and houses along the length of Ferguson Drive on the riverside were all affected by flooding in some way. Over 15 houses were evacuated on Ferguson Drive. There's also landslides along the Whatapuko Kaiti area due to the saturation of the soils. Makarori was particularly hard hit, and there was 8 families evacuated from Makarori, and 45 homes were threatened by further hillslides and slips.
You might have to speak up a bit. No, I think they're just trying to fix it up. That's why they're just running the fans and putting it up and down. That's all right. Yep. Yeah.
State Highway 35 was also closed by a major slip across Te Puru in that event. I've got some photos of the event in your report. You may recognise some of those localities. The next major flood was the Ngātika flood in 1985. Gisborne received 200 millimetres of rain within 24 hours, which is a real rainfall for Gisborne. A civil defence emergency was declared from 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. on the 26th. A Paratahi farmer described the scene as the worst flood since the 1948 flood. The Waimata River also rose to 11 metres in this event, covering Goodwin's Road Bridge, and it was fortunate there were no lives lost in that event. But the annual recurrence interval for that event was over 100 years. So yeah, it was a major flood. And it was interesting to note that the Tarahiru River overflowed and flooded through Makari and actually through Makaraka and into Ahapuni in that event as well. So that was a major. The next one I think everyone knows about is Cyclone Bola. So that's been a real benchmark here in our region. Still actually recovering from some of the damage in some areas. But yeah, in March 1988, one of the most damaging cyclones to hit New Zealand was Cyclone Bola, which struck the Hawke's Bay and Gisborne region The cyclone slowed as it moved over the area and actually sat on us for 3 days, and we got torrential rain. The worst affected areas were the hill country inland from Gisborne, where winds forced moist, warm air up over the hills and assisted in the storm rainfall. In places, there was over 900 millimetres of rain falling within 72 hours, and one area had 500 millimetres within 1 day. A state of emergency was declared by Civil Defence, and it's the largest recorded flood in the Waipoa, Waipu and Hikuai rivers. And it's what's known as a big catchment flood. It was actually, it affected major catchments right throughout the region. The floods overwhelmed rivers, stock banks, damaged houses, swept away bridges and sections of road and railway line, destroyed parts of the Gisborne main water supply pipeline. 3 people also died in a car that was swept away by floodwaters near Rangatuna. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes, about 3,000 in Gisborne, 300 in Wairoa and 400 in Tikaraka. And there was some major loss of grazing areas from farmers. Up to 30% of grazing areas were lost, and the landslide scars are still taking decades or are still healing. And I've got a photo of some of the scarring of the hills on that next slide.
Madam Chair, it's worth just noting that that is the advent of substantial forestry on the east coast.
Yes.
Make rash comments nowadays about forestry being the wrong land choice, but it was put there to help us
Stabilise.
after Cyclone Bola, and those photos are really great about what some parts of our district can do.
What is this bridge that's half fallen in?
The Wairoa Bridge. Yep.
They used the joint road rail bridge for quite a long period of time, right viral, and were able to use the rail bridge for car traffic
Oh, okay.
upstream of that river.
Okay, where are we next?
The next photo shows the Waipoa River at Kanakai Bridge. So this is one of our key monitoring sites at Tikaraka, and the photo shows the flow during Cyclone Bola reaching the bridge, I guess, decking. And the photo on the right just shows the extreme. That was a drought. That's the lowest the river's ever been in 1983, 5 years prior. So it just shows you the extreme. Yeah, just take note of that that photo on the left with the Cyclone Bola flow, because I'll show you like a hydrograph. Just keep that in mind, what that looks like. The next slide just shows some recent events. So we had a 2002 flood in the Waianaki Valley, 2005 in Labour Weekend, and last year, this is a photo of Tikaraka and the Rangatira Suspension Bridge, which was also knocked around in the 1948 flood, showing it's under pressure there again, and that's the Marae. So the next slide is showing the Waipoa River at Kanakanai, where I showed you the photo of Cyclone Bola river level. So just a definition of flood frequency, the 100-year recurrence interval means that a flood of that magnitude has a 1% chance of occurring in any given year. In other words, the chances that the river will flow as high as the 100-year flood stage this year is 1 in 100. But this plot shows you the river level from 1983 through to present. And if you look on the left-hand side, what we call a stage level goes up to 11 metres, and that first, I guess, interval where it reaches 11 metres, that's the Cyclone Bola level, so they got up to 10.67 metres in Cyclone Bola, and you can see we've only had 2 or 3 other events over that time, so it just shows you the significance of that event.
Very quickly too, what it also highlights is the pretty gnarly drought through
You would assume based on this that average rainfall is also going up because the trend is up. Is that right?
If I can comment on that, we've looked at our average rainfall from 1950 through to present, and it's actually in equilibrium, so there's no actual increase. I think we're getting events becoming more intense, I think what we're seeing. But I think when you're looking at that stage, like when you're looking at the bottom end, I can agree, but I'm not sure if that may be due to aggradation in the bed of the river, rather than actual kind of increased rainfall. you can catch things, Karen. Yeah, so the next slide is an overview of our rainfall sites in the Gisborne region. We're pretty fortunate. We've got one of the highest density of rainfall sites for any region in New Zealand, which is a really good investment. However, we can still get small, intense rainfall events which can fall between the sites. And the Tolaga Bay, I guess, event last year was probably an example of that, where we had quite a small cell, intense cell of rain that fell between the sites. And we did end up picking it up. We didn't pick it up immediately just because of the small, intense nature of that event. Our first site was installed in 1890 in Paratahi, so it's been around for a while, but the majority of the sites have been established over the last 30 years. We do have some significant data gaps within those sites, which can limit long-term data analysis. But it's a really good spread of sites.
Question very quickly. Do you see a increased incidence of those what we call weather bombs, those hill localized downpours? Is that an increasing trend, or do we just feel like it is?
I can't say it's an increasing trend, but the work that NIWA did looking at kind of our, I guess, Gisborne region in terms of climate change, they were predicting that we would see some more of these events coming through. So it's going to be potentially something we could be seeing, but I don't have any solid data to back that up. Yeah. Correct. Okay, thanks, Katie. The next slide is just around our flood forecasting capability. So we get our data from the Met Service. So we receive both weather watches and warnings. So the trigger is from Met Service, when they send out a watch or a warning, is the 50 mil within a 6-hour period or 100 mil within a 24-hour period. So yeah, we subscribe to that, and I guess being on the flood warning team, we watch our notifications pretty closely. The GDC will also got our rainfall alarms set on telemetry, so we've set both 15, 25 and 35 millimetre in our thresholds, so that gives us an indication when we've got some of those kind of intense storms coming through, so we get a notification through our system as well. In addition to that, could be to the high flow alarms or the high threshold alarms could be a further low intensity, longer lived event. Because of our geology in the Gisborne region, if we get those long, slow, I guess, kind of events, they can actually lead to kind of saturation of the soil, which can lead to other effects as well. So that could be a good addition to that, those alarms. And the next slide shows our GDC flood model. So this has been built in-house by staff. And it's a really good tool. So this takes the Met Service data. You can see the rainfall bars on the bottom in the blue. And then the trace going along the top is the river level. And then the red bands going through the graph, those are our actions that are set out in our flood warning manual where we take action. So we've got the model sits over 5 rivers, the Waipoua, the Hikawai, the Waimata, the Waipu and the Te Ara rivers. And yeah, as you can see, there's a band in the middle and it can forecast 3 days ahead. So we can kind of look at estimated river level 3 days ahead. So that gives us really good warning capabilities for, I guess, notification to property owners and moving stock out of the way. And it shows kind of 3 days hindcast as well. So we can kind of get a feel for kind of, I guess, like what's been played 3 days prior. And so, yeah, we've got a flood warning team. There's 4 of us. We're on register on call and to provide warning capabilities to both council and civil defence. And we follow a flood warning manual, which is pretty well established. We've also got an e-text capability now as well, so people can register and get the alarm sent out to them. So that's really handy straight to their mobiles. So the next slide just shows our vulnerability of our land, or stability of our land during a rain event. So most of the elevated land in the Gisborne district has potential for instability resulting in slippage, slumping, slope failures and general soil erosion. And there's a couple of particular areas that are vulnerable. So the riverbank edges and also that periphery of land or the hill country around town. Mackelroy is particularly vulnerable as well, just due to the poor drainage and stormwater out there. And it's particularly vulnerable with those houses sitting directly below the hillside slope. So I guess like when we've got a rain event, it's not all about the flooding, it's all about the saturation of the soils in those vulnerable areas.
It's quite a startling graphic, and it's got one colour to denote land stability. Do you have a more detailed presentation on that? That's quite an alarmist presentation.
I don't have a presentation today, but I see Murray is waving his hand down the back whether he wants to make a comment.
I don't need it now, I mean,
Yep.
just from a presentation perspective, that really concerned me. I would have thought all of that land would be, in what is stability, how do you determine that, grade stability, grade risk, good to get data. More granular version.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'll stay here. Morning, everybody. Just in case you don't know who I am, I'm Murray Caves, Principal Scientist at the Council. And just to let you know that at the moment we have a PhD study looking at this exact issue, and it's funded by EQC, and it's now starting its second year in January. And it'll take probably another year or so to get the results through, and then we can far more accurately delineate the landslide risk within the Gisborne City District. So we're waiting on that. And that student from Auckland University does report back on progress from time to time, but it's a work in progress. So another year, hopefully we'll be able to repopulate this, so it doesn't look like just a big zone of red, that we can delineate it far more accurately.
Just adding to that, then Murray, if you said it's funded by EQC, does that mean stability under an earthquake event as well?
No, it's just generic landslide susceptibility within the city. We have to do some additional work in another area, which we're waiting on getting time to access and analyse the LiDAR data, looking at our active faults, which currently we know that we have more than what are mapped, but they're obscured by the recent cover. And so that will be a second stage of work once we have the full LiDAR coverage, and we plan to do an analysis of the entire region for that risk.
Through you, Madam Chair, just one supplementary question. It would be helpful if the map had the level of rainfall event, because a flood event is pretty broad, so when it comes back, be clear about what quantum of rainfall we're talking about to create that red area, please.
We can look at that as it's two separate bits of information. Then it'll probably be a separate exercise that we would do in-house to actually take the susceptibility of overall landslide failure risk and the areas which are, excuse me, less or more risky. Then we can overlay sort of the rainfall patterns on that and actually fine tune it. You have to remember that we engage, or the PhD students engage with a particular set of skills, and then you have to then engage another set of skills to actually then go and take that the next step. So that's something separate.
But supplementary, Madam Chair, to take something like this to the public, for it to have validity, the first question the public is going to ask is what level of flood is reflected in that broad red area across the district, surely.
The difficulty is that we're actually talking about more than just flooding. We're actually talking about saturation of soils on the slopes, because obviously they don't get flooded. And there is the antecedent rain and the precedent rain as well. So it is a complex piece of work that would have to be done on top of the work that's being done in that PhD study.
So maybe just as long as we give that explanation to the public when we make it available.
Madam Chair, it would be more acceptable if the hill country was noted in this report, because hill country is subject to erosion, subject again to a heavy weather event, and just to blanket say that's all unstable, I thought.
I'll just make a comment on that overlay that's already established in our plan. So that's what's called a site caution overlay. So this is not new information that I've pulled out this information from the combined plan that's been around for since 1997. I just thought, yeah, but like you say, it just needs to be refined because it is just a rule of thumb at this stage. So the next slide is talking about stormwater modelling. So Council commissioned a stormwater model in 2014 using 2014 LiDAR data. It's useful to identify low-lying areas where stormwater ponding and secondary overflow paths occur through particularly the urban area. And this model could be updated using the new LiDAR data that we're expecting to see soon. But that's really useful in terms of protecting those secondary overflow paths from development. So in terms of, I guess, flood hazard planning, we've got tools to adjust communities to the flooding hazard. So that comes through our flood hazard zoning in our plan, the RMA subdivision regulations, building codes, the flood forecasting, civil defence, and public information and education. The Cyclone Bowler flood became the impetus for GDC to put the flood hazard overlays in our plan. And they were all based off historic flood spread maps from both the 1985 Ngātepa flood and Bowler flood. So they're really good data because they're actual floods that have actually occurred. And a draft flood hazard plan was prepared for the Poverty Bay Flats in 1990, which was one of the first in New Zealand. So the next slide just shows an overlay of the Poverty Bay Flats with those flood hazard overlays in place. So like I say, they were based off those two actual events. Yes, there is. Yeah. So I just quickly, the first, what we call the F1 overlay is the river, so the blue river running through the middle of the flats. The green and the yellow areas are what's known as kind of flood ponding areas. So it's where floodwaters pass through during that event, but essentially they were kind of not high velocity. But you can kind of see the pathway they ended up taking through the flats down to Apuni Lagoon. And the orange up in the top left is the Ngātepa flood, so that's what's known as a high hazard area. So the flood passed right through the Ngātepa Valley. So that's these overlays are really around controlling, I guess, development and making sure that people are aware of the risk from the flood hazard. So if you're looking at building on the Poverty Bay Flats, you need to have a minimum floor level to raise the house up to, I guess, be aware of, I guess, that flood risk. The dark red is the urban stormwater area. So there's areas within town that are particularly vulnerable from a flood event in terms of stormwater. Oh, yep. Yep, so the next slide is what's known as the Taylor area block. So it's an area that's currently proposed for residential development. We're just, I guess, just highlighting the fact that it is an area with a seasonally high water table and poor drainage. And so I guess through that residential development that's proposed there, we just have to be careful around, I guess, what is proposed in terms of possibly exacerbating the flood hazard in that area. So it was just something that I thought, like, there are areas that have been, I guess, developed for residential development post all this information and the flood hazard zones. And I think it's, even though it's outside of the current flood hazard maps, I think we just have to be precautionary around those areas.
What's the dark brown around Mary Street, Ormond Road?
Oh, so that's that stormwater
stuff.
Stormwater hazard, yeah. Yes.
Stream running through, actually, that was Finn's Caravan, and Triplet Street went into the culvert, blocked the culvert, and backed up.
That's correct.
A caravan.
Yeah, completely plugged.
Wow. Okay.
So how good is our information? I think our information is pretty good. So it is based off actual events, and we've actually developed those into kind of flood hazard overlays and managing development around, or avoiding development in the wrong areas. But we may be overprotecting in some areas, causing unnecessary costs. However, we may also be underprotecting in some areas, exposing people to greater risk. I think it's held us in good stead to where we are now, but I think it is timely to review it and, I guess, look going forward, particularly with climate change, and just understanding, I guess, like what areas are possibly at risk going forward.
That's a really big statement, that, we may be overprotecting some areas and underprotecting others in this part of the document. So Can you give us some context to that? Is there a 5-year plan to identify all the underprotected areas?
I probably can't talk in terms of the long-term plan as to what's going on. I'm just presenting the information as it stands at the moment. So I think that's probably a good question that someone else may be able to answer. All I'm doing is presenting, I guess, the information as it stands at the moment. I'm just recognising that there's, I guess, the climate change information that's coming out is saying that I guess we could be experiencing these further intense storms, and we're starting to get development outside of the known flood hazard overlays. So I think it's just timely to kind of take stock and I guess, yeah, just understand like what are our needs going forward. But I haven't got the answer, sorry. I'm just kind of presenting the information as it is, just so you're aware of what it is. Yeah, but I guess the last slide just does talk about further proposed work. So I guess really investigating flood risk to the townships where there's no current flood hazard overlays. So I think that's pretty important. And yeah, research into areas, like I said, where there's, I guess, other issues like high groundwater table and poor drainage currently. I think we just need to be careful around developing those areas and just make sure there's detailed design which explains how the residential development can go ahead.
So I remember, Pat, when we did our last flood overlay stuff, is that we had some pushback from people in neighbourhoods where we said, well, we will have to put a flood overlay over this area because of data we received. And there were people not happy with that because they felt that could affect when they want to on-sell. But it looks like what we're looking at now is that most areas would have a flood overlay, and you accommodate for that with proper stormwater and building regulations to lift.
Sponge Bay is possibly an example of that. It was, I guess when it was developed, it was outside of the city boundary and it didn't have a flood hazard overlay over it. But there was a rain event just prior to the subdivision actually being developed, and it actually went right across Sponge Bay. And Dave Peacock, who was the Rivers drainage engineer at the time, went out and did some investigation and actually found, like, talking to some of the residents, it was actually prone to flooding. So yeah, that now is covered by flood hazard overlays. So it's just not to say that if you're not within the flood hazard overlays, you're not going to flood. It's just, yeah, that was the information that was available at the time. Yes, there was a remediation which allowed that subdivision to go ahead. Yeah.
You carry on, Paul. We've got 2-3 more pages.
You know, that's it.
Are we done?
Yeah.
Hi, councillors. Any more questions of Paul or Keita before we move on? Thanks a lot for that. It was really informative.
So just flagging that that's a series of your information series, really, I guess in response to the review about upskilling our councillors around some of the work that we've got done, the hazards and risks that we know we're trying to manage CDM functions. So they're in the report at tables, most CDM group will be giving you presentations to upskill them all on what we're doing in certain spaces, so that you can be those advocates in the community.
Thank you for that. So, councillors, I take you back to page 133. This is a noting report. Can I have a mover for the Councillor Foster, second, and Councillor Faulkner? All in favour? Contrary? Carried. I think what we're going to do is finish this paper before we have a cup of coffee, and then I will move into publicly excluded after that. So, Mr. Tamati, we are ready for you. This report has been read by councillors. We've seen the traffic lights. Anything you want to add to your report? We're on page 160. Quarter 1 activity report 2019-20.
Thank you, Worship. Quarter 1 activity report. You'll note that on page 186, we've got the progress on plan years 1 to 3 LTP commitments. Yeah. You've got the matrix there. You'll note that on the right-hand side of progress, I believe we are making some progress, and we are developing in a lot of the commitments that we have there. There's probably a couple of things that we are a little bit off track there. I have noted that if we go through the bottom there, last two have the ability to send suitably qualified. Sorry, 163. 163, my mistake. 163. The last two rows in the matrix there on page 163 have the ability to send suitably qualified experienced support to other regions in their emergency responses. There's been a few responses in my tenure around the country at the moment. I haven't really been in a position to release any of my staff to go. However, and contrary to that, Anita and her staff and the comm staff and the public information management crew have kindly offered up a couple of her staff to go to Whakatane last week. When the balloon went up, the ministry asked for some PIM specialists, and they were ready to go, and then they were told to stand down at the last minute. So I could probably update that to be off track to developing, to be honest.
Just in that scenario, we've got staff going over for an eruption. We wouldn't have any kind of eruption training here because we don't have volcanoes here. So what would they be doing over there in that situation?
Are you talking about our comms people, the PIMs? They would be assisting with the public information requirements. So you can imagine that the requirements over there would be massive, not only local, national, but international. So the information I received is that the local CDM group in the Bay of Plenty were under the pump and struggling a little bit, and they put their hand up and asked if there's anyone that could provide help. Right. That was a national call, and we put our hand up and said we could supply too. And then the last minute they asked us to stand down because they had some local people from Waikato, I think, that were a little bit closer. The last one, the maintain and build partnerships with iwi and communities. Yeah, I alluded to before that iwi are encouraged to come to our KEG meetings. Some do and some don't. To be honest, I haven't really put in a solid plan to address iwi concerns. Not that there's been many concerns come to me in regards to sort of offence emergency management, but come next year, now that we have Kupu Lloyd, it's just at the back of the room, just been employed as our operations advisor. Now that I've got Kupu, between him and I, we will put out a task and a work program to go to the affected marae around the East Coast in regards to the 8.9 earthquake and the tsunami, resulting tsunami. That's certainly front of mind for me. Now,
To the chair, we're planning to do our resilience plan at the end of next year. We're planning to begin the development of our resilience plan at the end of next year, so 2020. And to do that, so there's one level of engagement, understanding what they want, but we're hoping to do that comprehensively. How do we support the resilience of all communities, but that includes iwi and hapu at that point as well. With the resources we have, that's kind of how we've staged to be able to respond to that concern.
that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, councillors? The floor is open if you've got any questions around this quarter's reporting. Moved by councillor Burdett, seconded by councillor Sheldrake. If there are no more questions, all in favour? Contrary, carried. Thank you. Thank you, Huremu. We move on to our next paper on page 167, which is about the Tairāwhiti Emergency Management Managers Report, Office Managers Report. Just moved by councillor Seymour. Yes, councillor Robinson.
Apologies, I had noted something which I should have raised in relation to the last paper, and perhaps we could just vary it, because it says on page 166, it says the LTP challenge, lack of community preparedness and readiness for emergencies, is off track. The resilience plan has lost momentum and is at risk of stalling. And I don't think we had a corridor around that. I did note it. Sorry for not raising it before.
Through the chair, we've deferred again with the resilience plan to December 2020. That's largely because of the resources that we've had. We've diverted them into items like Project Salus and Project Jupiter, which you're getting a report on in the next paper. So again, it is with the resources we have, we'd love to do it all right now, but that's what that comment reflects.
Anything you wanted to add? So it's been moved by Councillor Seymour, the next report, 167. Anything you want to add before we open the floor? Good, thank you. Anything you want to add? Otherwise, I'll open the floor and councillors can ask questions if they want to. There's an update letter from Sarah Stewart-Black, and then just your report in the back, some of that which we'll address later. I had a question which I highlighted on page 185, where you have your plan, and I see, and we've mentioned this before, where we have people's names and positions, and some of those names have moved on from council. And I was just wondering if that, I assume that would be updated soon. It is just under unclassified, page 3 of 3. Where I was always wondering if we should have a position or a name. What's that? Oh. I'm just commenting and saying I see names, and I was just wondering if it's better to have positions. Oh my goodie, I'm too fast for myself. Too much coffee. No, it's not. It's in the TMO report. This is the last report that we have. I'm on page 185. Oh, I am due take it back immediately. I will ask my question later then, thank you. Yes, and I've got a mover in Councillor Seymour, and I do have a seconder in Councillor Foster. Just to note a report, all in favour? Contrary, carried. We move on to our last report, page 180, and I will not repeat my question, but I would love to have an answer. Thank you.
I agree, Your Worship. Position only, not name.
Thank you. So that just needs to be updated. And then I do, we'll discuss this later, but just around key risks and issues, number 5 and 6 in there, just caught. What's that?
Does it take too much ink to put both position and the name?
No, they're just going to update it.
Because sometimes we don't know who's in that position.
Through the chair, apologies in our haste. I believe there is some direction in the Act where we have to name the staff member, so I will seek advice and come back to clarify that. Thank you.
Any questions, councillors? Councillor Seymour.
I'm on the first page, 180 of 186, and I note the request, and it notes the content of the report, and in particular that Gisborne District Council requires a permanently set up coordination centre. Now, I understand what that means clearly, but it has quite substantial financial implications. So I'd like us to have a paper on that. We're just noting it, and I don't think it's saying it's proceeding. But I'd like to think that we would talk with other agencies in here, and I don't think it should just, in this district, just be the ratepayers that fund a permanent setup. I mean, the police have a role, health have a role, fire and emergency services. There are a number of parties that ought to be asked to come to the party on this. So while we note that, I would like to think that we get a paper next year that says what that might look like, please.
Yes, and through Your Worship, we have been having discussions with other partners around co-locating our ECC, because it makes sense to do so, given our focus on the safety of the community. And this is also related to the other issue around the tsunami inundation modelling. And so we do need to be looking at other options for an ECC, and it makes absolute sense to co-locate with partners that are part of our emergency management response.
Councillor Wharehinga.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I'm very happy to move this paper. In light of us having the 4 earthquakes in the last 2 months or something like this, and also having been in the same room as Mr. Tamati for one of those earthquakes, and mid-earthquake seeing him sprint out of the room and off to go do his emergency management coordination, absolute professional. But I absolutely agree with this paper that we can't be spending, we need to have something up and running. We can't be spending 2 to 3 hours setting up the room in order to start coordinating the emergency management on the ground. So I absolutely support this. As is outlined in the paper, we're going to be having those future discussions, possibly with FENS, possibly with other organisations, and I think that's definitely the right way for us to go in order to be able to co-locate and coordinate, I guess. So I'm absolutely happy to move this paper.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Burdett. Can you use your microphone, please?
Given all the information, this is the second time we've come together on this particular subject. Any emergency, be it a flood, fire, tsunami, we as an organisation are all set to go.
There's 3 elements required for an effective response as a setting group and as GDC. First one is degree of notice. So if it's a tsunami and it's the Hikaragi subduction zone, and it's an 8.9, something of that magnitude, we'll have absolutely no notice. So we can cross that one out. The second element will be the degree, depth and level of training that we do in the prelim phases of any operation. We're currently in the prelim phase right now. And our training plan addresses probably about 80% of that. The third one will be the pace that we can set up an ECC so that your controllers can influence and lead the response. This paper identifies it's going to take maybe 2 to 3 hours if I can get my volunteers in. And when I say volunteers, I'm talking about people who staff to come in and help. Now, I've noticed on our first exercise this year that the level of volunteers that came in to help was pretty good. We've got 5 or 6 people come in because they saw it, but there's a little bit of fatigue as the year went through, and it was only just probably me and Bronwyn and one other to set up this whole space, which took a whole lot longer, probably 3 to 4 hours. So if you look at those 3 elements in any effective response, if you don't have any of those 3, then we're not set up, really, to answer your question.
Councillor Wartnop.
So do I take from that we are very heavily reliant on volunteering for these roles, as opposed to it being somebody's specific responsibility that they cannot simply ignore?
So through your worship, so we have our civil defence emergency management team, and that is their role, but there are only 4 of them. And then we have our controllers, and so the expectations with staff is that and contractually they are obliged to support in any civil defence emergency. At the end of the day, it really depends, like what we're clear is that you take care of your family first and then you can come in. And so that's usually how the response goes. So they, in a sense, aren't paid to do civil defence. It's an expectation that they do, and we train staff to do that. But when the balloon goes up, it's really our emergency management team that are first here, and there are 4 of them. Unlike in other settings where you've got a bunch of TLA, territorial local authorities, and a regional council, they've all got the emergency management people that can come together. We just don't have that.
Councillor Seymour.
But surely, through you, Madam Chair, Mr. we have police and fire, and each of those agencies, so it's not council on its own, all of the other agencies that participate are expected to front in exactly the same way as our people are. So it's not council on its own. And it's, I mean, it sounds like it's a failure, but we have to commend the people that have worked at it before. We've managed with lots of events. And it's just getting an upgrade now to 21st century delivery. But we do need to commend the people that have been those volunteers in the community, not necessarily on staff, that have responded in the past. And we do have, we mustn't forget that the other agencies are part of the team as well.
Yes, absolutely. And this is not about blaming what happened in the past. This is about improving and building on that. But this is about in the setup phase. Police don't come in to set up, neither do FENS. They come in after and they support that because they've got their other responses that they need to do. That's how it works in the ECC.
If we were looking for a new location for a dedicated EEC, I know a couple of people on the hospital board, just saying.
We will. And just coming back to what Councillor Robinson and Councillor Seymour has said now, this is a community response. The community look to us, though, to take charge and make sure everything is in place. So I do commend staff that we are moving forward with our partners, the hospital, the police, fire, all our township leaders, all our volunteers, and set up a permanent space where we can be ready. But it is up to us to take that charge because that's what the community need from us, but with all our partners joining us on that with their input and their resources as well. I'm willing to second this paper. So we've got a mover in Councillor Wharehinga. I've seconded it. Any more questions? All good? All in favour? Contrary? Carried. So what we're going to do is break for a lovely coffee till 22, and then we'll come back to cover the rest of our agenda. Thank you, everyone. I have, so now we've finished our CDEM public bit. Can I ask that Councillor Bedek move that we go into public excluded? Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Foster. All in favour? Contrary, carried. So I'm just going to take you through